Hey, this is Isa Nakazawa, your host for Transmission Studio, a show featuring the independent artists and community-based organizations that make San Francisco's arts and culture scene what it is today. And today I'm super excited to be joined by Faye Darmawi, who is the founder and executive producer for SF's Urban Film Fest. Stay tuned. Hi, Faye. Thank you so much for being on Transmission Studio today.
I am delighted to be here, Isa.
Yes, I am delighted too, and it's been a long time coming, so thank you for saying yes. And I thought before diving into the particulars of the work you do, in case some folks who are watching don't know, I just want you to kind of take me back to the beginning and speak to your original spark of curiosity in the intersection between urban planning and film, or you can take it even like to a more granular place of like just your interest and curiosity in space.
Yeah, so the SF Urban Film Fest was a kernel in 2012 when the redevelopment agencies were dissolved by Jerry Brown, who was our governor then. He was trying to solve a state budget crisis, much like we're going to be entering into soon. Mm-hmm. And he was basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. So he wanted to fund public schools by taking money away from affordable housing. So redevelopment agencies were funding affordable housing at that point, and he dissolved the redevelopment agencies, took the money from redevelopment agencies to fund public schools. But a third conversation was never had, which was he could have increased car registration fees. So this is a very nerdy sort of conversation that did not happen at all. Wow. And if you Google searched that action, the redevelopment agency dissolution, there was 2 newspaper articles in total, and it was Inside Baseball. So it wasn't like SF Chronicle or anything. And I don't think that the general public understood the implications of taking away affordable housing funding at that point. We do now because we are not creating as much affordable housing that we need, mostly because we don't have enough affordable housing funding. So what does that have to do with the film festival?
Great question. You start interviewing yourself.
Yeah. My name is Faye. No, because I was like, okay, now it took me about 4 minutes to describe the situation. Imagine me having to tell lots and lots of people 4 minutes of this conversation, and I thought, where is a place, or who can help me sort of disseminate and try to communicate the situation much more efficiently, much more emotionally engaging. And I had befriended a bunch of local filmmakers in the Bay Area because I was taking screenwriting classes. And I thought, who is really good at keeping butts in seats for 2 hours in a dark room? Filmmakers. Yeah. Why don't I try to recruit filmmakers to help me explain the situation? So I started the SF Urban Film Fest to jumpstart a conversation around affordable housing, and it became a conversation around urban planning because everything is interconnected. Once we start delving into affordable housing, it's connected to everything: transit, social justice. And the first SF Urban Film Fest was started in 2014.
And we're up to the 10-year anniversary, right? So tell me, give for folks who aren't familiar with SF Urban Film Festival, what is it?
It is an annual festival, 7 days of urban planning films and urban planning conversations. It's highly, highly curated by, we are now a group of 8 program producers, and each of us takes 1 day, or some of us take a break because there's 7 programs, and each of us expresses our connection to a certain aspect of urban planning, and we curate a slate of films or 1 feature film, and then we curate a panel discussion afterwards to dissect the issues that are in the film as it connects to the city. So it's not like a conventional film festival where we're focusing on the film and the filmmaker per se. It's really the film, the filmmaker, the policymaker, the community that it impacts, and the city that it impacts. So it's the story in the context of our urban environment.
That's a beautiful answer. And I think one of the things that immediately stood out to me when I started coming to your events was just trust me y'all, like the sheer efficiency and competence of every single person who works there is so inspiring to me, but also that your events really connect to community. And I think that might seem obvious, but I think it's difficult to do that because sometimes urban planners and architects, I'm the daughter of an architect for context, and I feel like actually it's not as intuitive as you'd think. Like sometimes urban planners and filmmakers aren't as like representative of the communities that they're creating about. And so what is that process like in terms of, it's just a lot of different stars in a constellation. So how does that process come together?
Yeah, so we try to situate the event and the theme in the actual place, physical place.
Got it.
So if we're doing something around Soma Filipinas, for example, we'll have a screening in Soma. If we're doing something around the transgender district, we'll have something at the Tenderloin Museum, which is in the transgender district. Mm-hmm. So you have a actual visceral experience of being in the place where the stories are being told and the impacts of certain programs or policies and the communities that are impacting the programs and policies. You are right there and you know where to go back to if you want to continue to engage.
Do you feel like part of your role is almost being like a mediator or translator? Because I imagine there's moments where there's like a lot of tension between what the community wants and like their relationship to what the developers are doing. And like there's, like you said at the very beginning of this interview, like we need to become collectively fluent and literate in a lot of things that I don't feel like the information's accessible. So like is part of your job kind of translating policy to community and vice versa, like translating and advocating for community?
Sometimes, yes. Really, it depends on the curation, and sometimes the space when it's curated is for that actual community. So you can actually see, if you're reading the program description, who the audience is. So some of our curators really want to keep it close.
Yeah. And
it's a forum for community. Obviously, no one is turned away, but it's not for general audiences. A lot of communities don't feel like they have a lot of safe spaces to have these conversations. So in those situations, it's very much internally focused. And we do encourage discussion about the impacts of larger policies on the vulnerable communities. In other situations or in other programs, we are trying to reach a very, very broad audience, because some of the projects that are implicated in the films, for example, this program that's coming up regarding the seawall of San Francisco impacts all of us. Mm-hmm. Climate change impacts all of us. The seawall, the bay, the rising sea levels of the bay impacts all of us. So in that situation, there is a translation,
of course,
between the wonky planners at SF Port and the general public.
Yeah, so I like it's like context driven and specific. One thing that comes to mind is I feel like in the Bay Area specifically, and this show is kind of like an homage to us, or just speaking to the particular dynamics of here, I do feel like we have a really big emphasis on the importance of arts and culture, which is unique to the Bay. And I love that. But I often think about the limitations too, right? So like you can see a film, which I see so many films that move me. And then I also wonder what are both the possibilities and what are the limitations in terms of action and impact? And if you can speak to what you've observed in your work and your career between both.
So my career is multi-pronged. So I started as an urban planner, and then I went into housing finance, and then I went into film festival production, and then I went into documentary film production partially because the film festival, I saw the limits of it. So what? I saw this film. Yeah. So what? so what? I got whatever 120 people in this room.
Right.
What are they going to do? How do I know they're going to do anything?
I think like that too. Yeah.
And I don't know how to answer that. I have had people come up to me, and I should probably document it more, like, hey, I went to see this thing and I remember X, Y, and Z, and then it made a connection the next time I saw X, Y, and Z. So there is awareness and there is education. Does it lead to policy change in the way that I want it to? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I went into we went into documentary filmmaking to work specifically with one community, and I thought that would be more impactful, to just concentrate on the story of the Filipinos in Soma. Is that more impactful if we're working with Soma Filipinas and really just the storytelling, the film? We made this film called Sa Amin, which means our place, is to set context for the work of Soma Filipinas. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it is. I
Yeah.
think they use the Soma Filipinas film trailer at the end of every ethno tour to set the context for folks to, when they walk around Soma, and they can see all the place markers of the Filipino community that's around.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think the more particular and specific is more impactful. And I also, as someone who was like cursorily, or whatever the word is, like adjacent to that process, that film Samin, I really saw the way it had a dual pronged approach of like, yes, it was storytelling to build for, it was almost like acting as a tool to create advocacy and awareness. But I also saw the way that it was cathartic and transformative for the people telling their story, because when we're invited to tell our story, what does that make us do? It makes us create a narrative for ourselves, and maybe we haven't been asked the right questions, and maybe we haven't felt like anyone's genuinely curious about us. And so that curiosity, which I think a film invites, I think it really gets the community thinking, and it gets them working together and kind of reflecting. And I think that, to me, is a transformation in and of itself.
And we're actually having direct impact. So we've been asking ourselves these questions, and we were screening for SF planning and for DPW. So for the staff, for the people who are at high, powerful levels.
Oh, okay.
So it would be very difficult now in the context of this, where the planners probably couldn't create a SOMA plan like they did before.
Yeah.
The SOMA plan before, which is really the incentives and the zoning that created all the high rises and luxury towers and the convention centers and everything, focusing on economic development to the detriment of the families' needs who live there, who for many generations have lived there.
And I think one of the powerful things to me about film is that it also emphasizes the immaterial spirit of why we do this work. It's like, it's not just utilitarian only. It's like you said earlier, these stories also animate things that can feel really divisive across position and identity and location. And it brings us into these like connective human experiences. So I think that's really powerful, because when I was growing up organizing, I felt like sometimes we lacked those stories that would help us kind of in a simple way. Like you said, I was you, like doing the 4-minute spiel that's kind of opaque and inaccessible. And people are like, was that supposed to move me to action? So I do think that the work that you're doing has like an ability to concisely and emotionally convey a very complex situation.
Yeah, and it's efficient. Like, we just bring a little hard drive and just go from place to place. So we got a grant to go from place to place. So we're going to San Diego.
Oh, wow.
Another diaspora Filipino community. We're going to 4 Filipino diaspora communities: LA, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco.
Wow, amazing. So I want to pause and then ground a lot of this conversation in your lived experience, because you have a unique story, as we all do, but you were born in Jakarta, and then you were dropped in like the suburbs of Bethesda, right? Mm-hmm. So can you just take me there to young Faye? Like, what were your first impressions of the suburbs?
Right. So I was born in Jakarta, and I lived there till I was 8. And I lived in military public housing. It looked just like it looked just like Sunnydale, actually, surprisingly. Maybe not. But it was dense and it was, noisy and dusty and chaotic and lovely and like palm trees and sun and like fenders and traffic. It was great. Rats. Okay. Mosquitoes. All of it.
It was lovely.
Sugar cane, everything.
Yeah.
And then my dad was recruited to work at the World Bank, and we basically would just like moved in like 60 days. Wow. I was plopped into Bethesda, Maryland, which is a leafy suburb outside of Washington, D.C., and there's no noise. There's a lot
no rats, or maybe
some, I don't know, but there's kind of like a common understanding that you behave a certain way. There's no outside vending. There's some birds, but maybe like the same one. And and you need a car.
Yeah.
You to get anywhere. It was terrible. I mean, as a young kid, to have to ask your parents to go anywhere. I couldn't understand why anybody would design a place like this. It was safe. Yeah, very safe, very controlled, very clean and healthy, but, lacking in any kind of stimulation for a young person or any kind of risk, really, which is what you need to problem solve. There were no problems to solve.
Right.
And the lack of stimulation, I think, actually causes some of the drug use, the violence. Young people need stimulation.
Wow. I think that's so profound, because I've been thinking a lot about the ways that our definitions of safety are informed by our environment. So I was born in the US. So like as a young person, and it's very contextual. You could be born in so many different types of communities being born in the US. It's so heterogeneous, but I think there is an early kind of kind of indoctrination is a harsh word, but around this idea that safety is sanitization, or that safety is comfort. And so I'm kind of curious what you're observing in San Francisco, because I feel like we were just talking about this kind of a notion of public safety is removing, all undesirables, and it's extremely racialized and politicized and classed. And you at a young age it seems like you observed that from pretty quickly.
San Francisco, I mean, we can start talking about that. So it's become a police state.
Yeah.
It's the occupying forces of SFPD makes me feel less safe. Yeah. And then like the private security, we just walked by like at least 7 private security. And that is like the blunt tool. What we're missing is really sophisticated community engagement, sort of human level types of activities and spaces and funding for, I want to advocate back to what you were saying, arts and culture, really like funding some of the arts and culture organizations that are folding up very quickly because we're not being funded, to create the connective tissue. We could be engaging folks on the street in very, very creative ways.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's not law and order.
No.
And we might need some law and order, but we also need some artists. We also need some singers. We need some dancers. Yeah. We need health and medical professionals. We need actual spaces.
Yeah, there's a whole like ecosystem of roles that are needed. It's not just one. It's not just the artist or culture worker, right? It's like director. It's all of it. Working though, I think for me, what I was so moved by what you were saying with your kind of observations around how the suburbs turns on this kind of like fracturing and isolation and sanitization is like, I think we also need to come together to share definitions. Because I think when we're all operating from different assumptions, then it shows up in the work that we're doing. Like, what is your definition of what it means to be human? What is your definition of community? Like, I think we're oftentimes working from an assumption of shared definition. And I'm like, what is your definition of safety? Yeah. And can we actually listen to each other's definitions first before reacting so that we can come to a place of mutual understanding as a community? Like, what do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel? Because I feel like we're all going to say different things. Maybe not. Maybe we all say the same thing. But I think what I'm seeing is the same thing where, like, it becomes, it always defaults to law and order. You know, because that's also a power dynamic. We don't necessarily feel empowered. And it's right now I'm feeling the, like, anxiety and fervor of elections. Yeah. Like, can you speak a little bit to what's going on in the local elections? Like, what are you seeing?
Well, we saw the Republican machine outshine itself. And the recent vote in San Francisco where 60% of the people who voted, not that many people voted to institute this, I don't even know, procedure where we're supposed to test folks or drug use before we give them any public assistance. So we withhold public assistance until we know that they are not using. And if they are using, then we will require them to go into drug rehab programs. What are they going to do in the meantime? Because there are not enough drug rehab programs in the beginning, in the first place. And B, why criminalize someone who has an addiction? It's a medical condition. Yeah. It's not a criminal condition. So I am so surprised that San Francisco went this way so quickly. Yeah. Maybe because I'm idealistic, but you know the money behind these recent propositions it was like 2 to 1. Wow. So, you know, money talks in the U.S. These elections on all levels are fueled by cash. So,
and I'm not trying to be cynical, but I'm not surprised by that because I think you can, in San Francisco, I think you can be progressive in your rhetoric, but you can vote conservatively. And I think there is like a chasm oftentimes between how we present versus what our actual fears are. And we vote with our fear. Yes. We don't vote. I think because of social media and like the performative nature right now of identity, we perform for a certain sense of validation that doesn't necessarily correlate to what we actually want. So I think that divide, for me, that's why I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The propositions were written in a very confusing way, in a very misleading way. So
that's an important thing to bring up.
I mean, it's by design.
Yeah. I find them confusing. Like, I've had that happen throughout my whole voting life. I've been like, wait, am I voting for this or against this? And I have a question about technology because I know it's asked a lot, but I am curious because San Francisco is also kind of the hub, maybe not as much anymore, around like emergent tech. And you're seeing like, you know, all these conversations are happening simultaneously with like AI, and those are digital geographies, you know, and someone who's deeply interested in space and how it affects us, like, I wonder about how that is affecting and impacting how we interact with our hyper-local environment. Like I feel like we need new language because I feel like social media and social networks and the internet is not a separate place. Does that make sense? It's like, we're almost becoming cyborgs where it's a lot more fluid than the way we describe it. Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you factor in technology as a place?
So actually, just to round out what we were talking about before, and also to connect it to this question, which is that what if we had funded short videos to explain how actually addiction and recovery works?
Oh, I love that.
What if we had a video about where safe consumption sites are working and the data behind it? We could have used film. We could have taken the SF Urban Film Fest way.
Yeah, I love that.
But AI and digital spaces, those are tools, right? These are capitalistic tools to sell you stuff.
Right.
That's how those tools are funded. Eventually, there is a money-making goal at the end of the day. I don't know what those money-making tools are, what their end goals are, but it's about making money. It's not about making spaces, and it's not about creativity.
Right.
Don't ever forget that. Where it comes from tells you where it's going.
That's
because it came from Google. It didn't come from
organic.
a artist in Soma.
What would you say to like an 18 or 21-year-old who would say, I've built my entire independent artist career off TikTok and Instagram, and like I've seen the way that it translates and materializes to meaningful change and meaningful community generation.
Great.
Generativity.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. But
That's
TikTok's owned by but TikTok's owned by the Chinese government. You know, they got you.
Yeah.
And I mean, God forbid we go into war with China, but
yeah,
what's going to happen? I mean, these are like crazy
questions.
Yeah. You just have to be aware, buyer beware, right?
Yeah.
Great. I'm so happy that the social media campaigns and personas that you've developed have transformed yourself and your community.
Yeah.
What other things could you have done also?
Yeah.
That are more sustainable, that are intergenerational, that will take you into other parts of the physical world, your physical community, that your social media didn't.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it also, I think the reason I'm bringing it up is because to me, the answer can be both and. But I feel like when it becomes so disconnected from your local community, which I'm not trying to argue again, like it is for everybody. But I think I've observed that in my own community, Oakland, that like when what feels more immediate and visceral is the social network online, the digital platform, then I'm going to interact way differently with my lived neighbors because I'm like, oh, I'm not even, nothing in this like immediate lived reality touches me the way this does. And so I wonder, even like walking around San Francisco, it's so common to see everyone on their phone, which I'm not trying to be dystopian about. Like I still see people connect. I'm not trying to say it's like a singular thing.
Yeah.
But I do wonder for the work that you're doing, how it has a huge implication on how people interact or how people would vote if they felt invested. And some people feel invested, but then also they're like, I'm working from home. I'm not really downtown like that. Right? I'm good. And to me, that's a really loaded, fraught, classed, racialized thing. Because it's like, who's on the street? They're not on their phone. They're the ones who have to live out and be the, you know, the recipient of the cost. And we get to just have opinions from the safety of our homes, right? So to me, that's something I think a lot about. And I think your work is so essential, which is why I wanted to bring you in, because I feel like what you do is that work every single day, no matter what. Like that commitment is just your commitment for the last like 10 plus years, no matter what time or what's happening in San Francisco, which brings me to the film festival, which is the 10th anniversary of SF Urban Film Festival next month in April. Can you tell us a little bit about the theme and what we can expect and the dates?
Yes, the dates are April 15th through the 21st. 2024.
Yeah.
So Monday through Sunday. And the theme is Rooted Resurgence. So what that means is that we will definitely experience a resurgence. San Francisco always does. But we are advocating to center equity and justice within that resurgence. So most of the policies are going to be benefiting a certain subsector. And the thinking is that subsector will trickle down to everybody else. We're advocating the opposite. We really want to advocate for a rooted resurgence, rooted in community, rooted in initiatives and programs that have been going on for a really long time, supporting those. And then if you start a new one, to make sure that you loop in folks that have been doing this work for a long time, and maybe folks that you have never met before.
Yes.
So really rooted in the lived experience and in the physical world.
Wow, Faye, that sounds so, beautiful and important, and I'm so excited to attend. And can you just plug like a website or how we can stay connected to your work?
Yes, please. We are on all, no, not all, mostly Instagram. and LinkedIn, SF Urban Film Fest.org, and at SF Urban Film Fest on Instagram.
Amazing. Yeah, well, we'll all stay connected, and hopefully everyone who's watching will attend. And thank you again for all your work and just being you.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Thanks, Faye. Thank you so much for watching Transmission Studio, and stay tuned for our next episode.